Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Anderson.
And I'm Tricia Johnson-Drapeau.
And I'm Sean Clark.
And we're the Student Financial Assistance Officers for the Department of Education. Every year, we make sure to reach out to you, the graduating grade 12 Yukon students, and of course your parents, to help outline what types of funding will be available to you if you decide to attend post-secondary studies. Now, this year is obviously quite unique, no matter what you decide to do after you finished your classes. Whether you are planning on taking a gap year, working or traveling, or jumping right into a new program and learning a topic that you're excited about, I'm sure you're facing many uncertainties. We've put together this presentation so you can access information on our funding programs whenever it's convenient for you. The presentation runs through each of our funding programs and their eligibility requirements. If at the end of the presentation you have questions about our programs or your eligibility, we welcome you to contact our office. From now until further notice, our office will be closed to the public. While you won't be able to come meet with us in person, we're happy to communicate with you over email, phone, or Zoom if you'd like to be face-to-face. While there are many adjustments to consider this year, including our office being closed to the public, please remember that we're here for you to help you in any way that we can. We're still working full-time to process your applications as quickly as possible, even if you can't come in to see us. So let's get started.
Our office administers various different types of funding programs. In this presentation, we will be walking you through each of these programs and how they work. This includes the Yukon Grant, Student Training Allowance, Yukon Excellence Awards, scholarships, and the Canada Student Loans and Grants. First, let's start with the Yukon Grant. The basic eligibility criteria are that you must be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, have completed at least 2 years of high school in the Yukon, and that you have lived in the Yukon for the 2 years right before your classes start. For those who may not clearly meet the 2 years of high school in the Yukon, we've expanded our eligibility criteria to include those who have resided in the Yukon during their high school years. For example, this will include students who may not have been successful in their high school studies, but remained in the Yukon, or students whose family home is in the Yukon, but they have taken studies outside of the Yukon, like private school. If you have a special living situation and aren't sure if you meet the eligibility criteria, we encourage you to contact us and we can help clarify if you're eligible. Our residency criteria is based on the following statement. A Yukon resident is determined as an individual who, in the settled routine of their life, make their home, resides in, and is ordinarily present in Yukon. When you are applying for funding, we ask you to confirm your residency over the 2 years prior to your classes starting. If you are away from the Yukon while not in full-time studies for longer than 4 months, we will be required to ask you to verify your Yukon residency further. This may include requesting confirmation that you still have a valid Yukon driver's license, healthcare card, and have filed your taxes in the Yukon for the last 2 years. One major consideration that you should be aware of is that if you are eligible for student funding in another jurisdiction, you may not be eligible for funding in the Yukon, including the Yukon Grant. This can happen if you, your parents, or your spouse have resided in another province or territory for 12 months or longer. Again, if you have a specific question on how this may affect you, we encourage you to contact us for a review and discussion on your circumstances.
Next, we will touch on further eligibility requirements related to your studies. To qualify for the Yukon Grant, you will need to be enrolled in full-time post-secondary studies. This means that the school you're attending considers you to be full-time and that you are taking college-level courses. You must also be studying at a designated institution, which can be anywhere in the world. Most Canadian schools are designated, and this means that they approve funding for their students to receive government funding. If you aren't sure if your school is designated, you can look online or ask the school directly. If you're still unsure, we can help. Now for the most anticipated part. How much will you get? The Yukon grant is calculated based on how many weeks you are in full-time studies. For the upcoming 2021 year, the Yukon grant rate is $144 per week. This adds up to about $2,300 for a typical 4-month semester. If you are leaving the Yukon to go to school, you can qualify for our annual $1,500 airfare amount to help with your travel costs. There are also additional travel funds for students who are traveling from a community outside of Whitehorse to go to school. We send you the Yukon grant checks made out in your name. Typically, these checks are sent directly to the school where you can pick them up. This process may change depending on how schools will be adjusting due to the pandemic. So for now, we will let you know on your funding approval letter if there will be any different process than this. Otherwise, the Yukon grant is usually paid out at the beginning of each semester. And lastly, the deadline for Yukon grant is 6 weeks after your classes start. For example, if your program starts at the beginning of September, the deadline will be around mid-October. And if you enroll in another program that starts in November, your specific deadline will be 6 weeks after that start date.
We have another funding program called the Student Training Allowance, or STA for short. However, it's available only to students studying at a Yukon institution. We have 2 designated Yukon institutions, Yukon University and Alcan Air. This program is calculated by weeks of study as well, but the average rate is slightly lower than the Yukon grant at $112 per week. This amount does fluctuate though, depending on your family size. If you have 1 or more kids, the weekly rate increases. Student training allowance is paid bi-weekly instead of per semester and can be applied directly to your tuition costs at Yukon University. For the student training allowance, you do need to be studying full-time and have lived in the Yukon for the 2 years before your classes start. There is no high school requirement for this program, so people who have moved to the Yukon after high school may still be able to access the STA. You can also use this funding towards upgrading classes at Yukon University or any approved post-secondary program. The total amount of funding available, whether you are receiving Yukon grant or STA, is 170 weeks, which adds up to be about 5 years of schooling. This 170 weeks can be used for either Yukon grant or STA, or a combination of both, but you can only access 1 program at a time.
Many of you are aware of the Yukon Excellence Awards. These are awards that you've earned when you receive 80% or more on your final courses, your grades 10, 11, and 12 courses. We try to send out a letter to students once a year with the amount that you've earned. We haven't been able to send out a letter in the past year, but we've calculated your awards and you'll be able to access them and submit an application. Once you have earned your Yukon Excellence Awards, they can be used to reimburse your tuition and book costs after you've graduated. You can apply for these at the same time as the Yukon grant, and once you send in copies of your tuition receipts, we will send you a check with your awards. And lastly, the Yukon Excellence Awards do expire 10 years after you leave high school. So while you don't need to ask for them right away, make sure you don't forget about them.
We also have a few smaller scholarships that we administer through our office. Each scholarship has their own criteria, and you can apply for them at the same time as you apply for the Yukon grant. There are also many other organizations that offer scholarships to post-secondary students. You can find some of these scholarships at our website. Lastly, it is important for you to know about funding available through the Canada Student Loan Program. As resident of Yukon, you will be applying for funding through our office as well. The basic eligibility requirements are that you are attending full-time post-secondary studies at a designated institution. Your program must also be at least 12 weeks long. As students just leaving high school, you will be considered dependent, and information from your parents will most likely be required. The deadline to access this funding is 2 months before your classes end. It's 2 months before your classes end. As you may have heard in the news, The federal government has announced temporary increases to this program for the upcoming 2021 school year. These increases are aimed to assist all Canadian students whose families have been financially impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. This includes increasing the maximum weekly loan amount from $210 per week to $350 per week. The Canada Student Loan Program also offers grants, some of which have also increased temporarily due to the pandemic. As a Yukon resident, we encourage you to apply for these grants as part of the loan program. While you do need to first qualify for a loan in order to qualify for any grants, you are not required to receive the loan portion. Some of the grants include the basic grant for full-time students, and grants specific to student circumstances, such as the grant for students with dependents, the grant for mature learners, and the grant for students with permanent disabilities. If you are studying part-time, there's also federal grants and loans available for part-time students. If this applies to you, you can access the application on our website.
So you will need to submit an application every year that you go to school. The applications for all of these funding programs are available on our website. An online application process is available and encouraged. Any supporting documents that we require can be emailed directly to us, and we will add it to your application. And finally, please note that we will only be able to start approving applications closer to the end of June. So there's no rush to get your applications in right away. Take your time, decide on what school you will be going to in the fall, and then submit your application anytime over the summer. We appreciate it if you're able to include the most accurate information possible in your application. Well, everyone, that's the end of our presentation. Here's our contact information, and if you have any questions regarding our funding programs, or if you're unsure if you qualify, please feel free to contact us, phone us, or email us. Thank you for watching, and we hope you all have a lovely summer.